Hi there, Rob here, and part 3 of the series on rings and adjusters and things. As you can see from the screen here, a few basic bra adjuster shapes, the rounded and square style, pass-through tapes, and you can use this technique or these techniques for making anything where you've got loops and things going through, so belt buckles and all sorts of things like that. You are limited by your imagination. So there's a few little tricks we can use as well. So rather than just have that passing through, a bit of an optical illusion there. And the same thing here with the rounded corner one. So what I'm going to do is, rather than just draw these freehand, I'm going to introduce a technique of drawing things to a specific size. So if I just create a new layer for my adjusters, sliders, whatever you want to call them, and I'm going to use the rounded rectangle tool, which lives in with the other shape tools. Now, rather than click and drag to draw a shape, I'm going to just click on the page and I can actually enter the size of the object that I want to draw. Now, it's quite handy for getting things in the right proportion. For example, a bra slider might be 25 by 10 millimeters, or the top half of it. So you can actually type in 25 and 10, and you can also include the corner radius. We'll get back to that in a second, and click on OK, and that gives you your shape there. Now, because my shape was only 10 millimeters high and the radius was 5 millimeters, I've actually got a completely curved end, this kind of lozenge shape. So we've also got a rectangle rather than a particular path. And if I go and get my transform panel, this is the panel we're going to use now. This gives us a bit of detail about the shape we've got. You'll also get the transform options come up in your control bar up here. So you can see the size, the width and the height of the original shape, and also in here, so the width and the height. It also gives the position of a particular point on this shape on the page. So you can see here this reference point in the top left hand corner of this little set of shapes here. That refers to the corresponding point on my shapes. This top left here corresponds to that top left there. And that is where the X and the Y position, the across and the down position of that particular point. And I could change that to be the bottom right point. So that's that one there. Or what is usually the default, the center point. So if I want my top left to be in a particular position on the page, maybe 100 millimeters across and 100 millimeters down, I can just type that in, and that is now in that position there. And the same for the width and the height. And I can change the width and the height to specific numbers rather than just dragging them. So if I say, right, my width of this shape needs to be 30 millimeters, I'm just selecting using the arrow key to increase the number there, the up arrow key, and increase down. Also, if you want to keep those in proportion, which is kind of the similar thing to like dragging when holding the shift key down, if you make sure this little chain link button is set so it's actually constraining those two numbers, so it's basically keeping them in proportion. So as I increase the height of my shape, the width increases in proportion, and as I go down, the same thing there. If you want to adjust those separately, just click on that button so the chain shows that it's broken, and you'll be able to adjust them separately. So if I open up this panel, so it's one of these panels a bit like the stroke panel, where if you click on the little double arrow here, it will roll up and then expand the panel through a series of more complicated or simple stages. So as you can see with a rectangle, it shows me all the various properties of this rectangle, so the width and the height, and also down here the curve of the corner. And you can see by this chain link here, that's linked together. So if I change these values again, they'll all change. So I can actually make the corner radius a little shallower or a little tighter there. Now, to do the adjuster, I'm going to start with a square adjuster. So I'll adjust this. I'll say a 2 millimeter corner radius. I'll get rid of the fill there, And again, if I just clicked with my rounded rectangle tool, I can actually add in, say, 25 and 10, and I can make my corner radius less, like that, or I can just adjust it afterwards. So there we go. So to make an adjuster, I need 2 holes and a surround. So I'm actually going to duplicate this. Now, again, using a definite number rather than just dragging and doing it by eye, because I'm going to want a 2mm gap between the 2 holes, but also around the outside of the holes as well. So this adjuster is going to be made up of 3 separate rectangles, one surrounding the 2 others. So if I want to make a definite movement or definite duplication, if I select this object here, it's 10mm high, tells me there, tells me here. I want to have it showing 2mm below this version, so I need to move a copy of this down 10mm plus 2mm there. Now, to do these kind of definite moves, I could either type the number in, work it out myself, or easy way, object, transform, and move. Now, there is actually a shortcut for this. If you've got an object selected and you hit the enter key, it'll bring up the move panel straight away. And as you can see, I've got my preview selected here, so it's already made the move that is actually in this box here, so I can move something horizontally, vertically, or a particular distance in a particular angle. So if I make this, I don't want to move it horizontally, I don't want it to go across, so I'll just hit 0, put that in there. Then vertically, I want it to be 10mm lower, plus the extra 2mm to get me a gap between the 2. And I hope you can add 10 and 2, but if you can't, you can actually enter the sum itself, so 10 plus 2 in the box there. If I press the tab key just to bring me into the box, you can see how it's moving that object. If I click on copy, it will make a copy, and I know that copy is exactly 12mm lower than that original one. Now if I select both of those objects, if you look in my transform panel here, you can see how it shows me the height of both of those objects together. If I select one of them, it just shows the height of one. If I select them both, so I know that whole object there, as the two separate parts grouped or selected together, are 25mm wide and 22mm high. So again, minor bit of maths here. If I want to have a 2mm gap all the way around here, it needs to be 2mm extra on the width either side, so that's 4mm, and the same for the height either end there. So what I can do now, if I just make a note of 25 wide and 22 high, if I go and get my rectangle, rounded rectangle tool, I'll just click. So I want it to be 25 plus 4 and 22 plus 4. I'll keep the corner radius the same, and then that will match this corner here. Click on OK there. Now it's off center at the moment, but no need to worry, because what I can do, get my selection tool, I can select the first 2 smaller rectangles, shift select, right click and group them, and now I can use the align function to line up everything on the center. So I can select both of those. I could either use the transform, so the align and arrange buttons up here, or I can use my align panel, which is usually tucked in with the transform and pathfinder panels. So because these 2 here are actually grouped together, they'll act as one object. So if I just select both of those and then get them to align on the centers, both vertically and horizontally, and if my calculations are right, that should be 2mm border all the way around. So the final thing we need to do, which we did with our ring in the earlier video, is to actually make this into a shape that actually has holes in the middle. Now you just got to be a little bit careful here. I'll just ungroup those 2 there. If you want to punch or knock 2 objects or objects out of another object, make sure that the one that's doing the punching is on top. So I've got my lower and upper rectangle, and then underneath that, on the 3rd level down, or 3rd stage down on that row, sorry, on that layer, is my outer rectangle. So if I select all three of those and then right click and use the make compound path, that now makes one object, and I can tell how the compound path works. If I just fill it with a shade or a colour, you can see how it's knocked those two one through the other. So that is one whole adjuster, and I can just relabel that. Now, if you want to resize these, you will need to do it in proportion. So shift and drag on the right hand corner. Also, worth noting, if you're working with rounded rectangles, in the transform panel, notice I've got this scale corners option selected. If I don't have that selected and I shift and drag and expand, it can get a little bit out of sync, or the size, the rectangle won't actually, or the corner of the rectangle won't enlarge. So I need to scale my corners, and there you can see the curve has scaled as well. Now, if I start doing things like dragging them only in one direction or enlarging them in one direction, I will get the distortion here. So if you do want to make a wider adjuster, draw it starting with the size you need, and then you can enlarge it in Pro when it's a whole object. If you start dragging it just on one side, you'll get all this coming apart and not adjusting properly. So if I want to make a wider adjuster, I just go and grab my rounded rectangle tool, click, and I'll make a wider adjuster. So I'll do it 30 by 10, click on OK, and then I can go through the same process there.